Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another SGSO Network Member Highlight. I'm Daniel Barrera Ortega, and I'm the Program Specialist here at the SGSO Network. And as you know, these member highlights are short interviews where we get to know members of the network and get a little snapshot into their world and how they came into this work. So I'm joined here by an amazing team. Yeah, who else is in the room with me, Reggie?
Hi, my name is Reggie, and I work at LifeLab as the Director of Curriculum and Professional Development. And I'm really excited to talk with Lola today about, how she got into school gardens and how she continues to sustain that work. And I'd love, Lola, for you to take some time to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lola Bloom, and I'm the former director of food and wellness at DC Bilingual Public Charter School here in Washington, D.C. I still live here in Washington, D.C. I have another job with a government organization. And nevertheless, I'm still deeply involved with gardening and children here and beyond the borders of our fair city.
All right. Okay. So we know that you're working at a couple of different organizations and we know a little bit about your role, but how long have you been, working within the organizations that you just mentioned?
Sure. So my my history of working with schools and school gardens probably started around 1998. Back then, I was working with an organization here in DC called Centro Nia, which was a community-based organization in Columbia Heights. Um, a friend and I started or worked on a garden at that space. And through learning how to garden in that space, it evolved into a larger project. But before starting that larger project, I was in college still and became an art teacher. I studied art. I didn't study horticulture or anything like that. Once I did uh, come out of school and started teaching art, I would work with this garden project on the side during summers, after school, and eventually it evolved into um, a nonprofit that my friend Rebecca and I called City Blossoms. And that really got incorporated around, I think, 2009 officially. And City Blossoms was a nonprofit dedicated to creating beautiful, safe, green spaces with children and their neighbors and families. And that looked like school gardens, that looked like pop-ups in lots that were not being used, that looked like collaboration with other organizations that were doing great work here in DC around outdoor education. And I was a City Blossoms beyond just like the run up and also the running it with Rebecca for about officially, I was full time for 7 years. And then I went on to work at DC Bilingual, and I was pulled on as an operations manager, which I had no idea really what to do with that title. And so I basically just spent a lot more time outside with the kids in their garden space, which was large, and I wanted to make it bigger and better and beautiful. And through my stubbornness and will, developed a program of a whole department of food and wellness there that incorporated a scratch prep kitchen, a pretty large garden, and culinary and gardening education. And I was in that role for 8 years. I just left a year ago.
And little fun fact, actually, Lola was one of my first garden education job through Food Corps, and really it was, I think you said it best. It was like this determination of basically creating the whole department, if not like a tiny nonprofit within a larger school system. So, to that point, part of what we really wanted to talk about this member highlight was how folks can really leverage wellness and wellness initiatives and wellness policies to secure support for school gardens, to codify support for school gardens. And so I would love to hear a little bit more as you started building that tiny, not tiny, it was pretty mighty. It still is. mighty force of wellness, right? How did you create it so and codify support for the garden program and the culinary program through the wellness lens, through the wellness initiative?
Totally. So prior to working with DC Bilingual, I didn't really understand like what a wellness policy was. I'd kind of seen it in some of the schools I'd work, which was like, don't maybe like bring tons of junk food for children, or like everybody should have, rooms or whatever that are free of pollutants and have airflow. Um, but I didn't really know what a wellness policy was until I'd started in this role. And I realized like actually DC Bilingual had the foundations for having a great wellness policy according to like the guidance given by the USDA or the, local school system. Now, DC Bilingual was actually part of Centronia, my first gardening gig. It was born from that organization and then became independent as a public charter school. And something that was fortunate was that the head of school, Daniela, was incredibly supportive of wellness initiatives because she herself, was in favor of nutritious food and healthy well-being and just like getting kids outside, all that stuff, right? So first of all, like I had backing. I had backing from the head of school. I had backing from different teachers and community members because they knew me for a long time before I started my role. And I had backing from kids because they enjoyed a lot of the activities that we were doing. And so when I started, we had a garden that needed to be developed more to be a learning space. And we started to build on it little by little. And the way we started to integrate the education piece was at first, actually, City Blossoms was like a consulting organization for that space. And they would come in every week and do a class with pre-K, right? Eventually, we realized that that was something we could start to do ourselves because we had a position, we had someone who was coming in actually as a consultant at first who was interested in doing that work. And that was Shay Miller Vieira, who's still the culinary and gardening educator there. So we started to continue to like kind of work with classes sort of like ad hoc. We'd have to really coordinate. And I'm sure folks probably who work at schools have had to do this before as well, where it's like, okay, well, I know that the second grade curriculum is going to study insects in, April. Let me see if that teacher is cool with me taking the kids outside and doing some classes. And it was very much like relationship based on relationships and not on a policy or a structure. And we did that for a couple of years, and actually, Daniel, I think we were still doing that when you had arrived. And then another fortunate piece was just the timing of my role in the organization and the growth of the school. So the school had decided to grow, and a part of that would be that they needed more capacity to teach specials, which are like the extracurricular things that every kid gets, like PE and art and music every week. Okay. And so there was an opening for there to be a cooking and gardening class. And we were able to, interestingly, make that a regular thing right at the start of the pandemic, because they needed especially more content for kids to participate in at that point. So we were able to test out lessons on a regular basis, even though they were online, to the point that when we were back in person, it was an expectation from students in the school that they would get a culinary and gardening education every week. Also aligned with that was funding, right? And so part of the funding came from the fact that we were going to be growing, and there was already funding invested in the school. But the other part was a lot of grant writing. And fortunately, I had been the co-founder and co-executive director of a nonprofit, so I knew my way around grant writing and fundraising. And that was a huge part of ensuring that, number one, we had enough to pay an actual staff member, and then supplies, and also just like sustain the program moving forward. So that's kind of a long answer. I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly, but that's sort of how it began to become embedded in the expectations and the curriculum of the school.
It really sounds like that because of this wellness policy and, your experience in working alongside the school, being in relationship with folks, you were able to use this wellness policy as a way to further that relationship and to say, we're this is what we want to say. We just need to do what we say we're about. I'm curious about, what do you think is a key challenge that came up in this process? Like what was something that was difficult that you navigated and how did you overcome the challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think like part of it was what I was just talking about was like the funding of it all, because I don't know if the principals at the time really thought that it was a good use of money to be able to like have this other special at the time, especially because we were spending a lot less to have it on this ad hoc basis. But positioning it as number one, a way to reinforce science standards and also connect the dots between the food that was being grown in the garden and then that was being prepared in our school kitchen, and supporting nutrition education. That all I think started to coalesce like the vision of, oh, okay, this could be a part of our school. Another thing I didn't mention is that, every school has to fill out what's called a local wellness policy, which is universal. It asks all the same questions. And they go around nutrition, physical education, environmental, mental health, and a couple other like wellness areas. And so, and then DC specifically had like healthy, what was it called? Sorry, I'm gonna forget the name, whole school, whole community, whole child focus. And they were trying to elevate that and provide some funding for it as well. So it's kind of like these multiple factors had to come into play to solve that problem of number one, were the principals going to bite? Was the head of school going to be like supportive? And then will we be able to pay someone at all? Like what happens if the budget gets cut? Like, does that mean we're going to eliminate this role? Um, so that took a little bit of like convincing and working, and I had to like stand in front of the board and stuff and answer questions and in front of parents. But eventually we were able to convince folks.
I think that also speaks, you said something really important, and I think Reggie also just verbalized it, that it kind of seems like you laid out a foundation that it was easy to then build on top of, and a lot of that foundation, and I've heard you say this multiple times today, as well as in our work together, that relationship is so important with the custodial staff, with the head of school, with the board, with the different stakeholders. So when the time strikes to say, okay, we're going to capitalize on this moment, everybody's on board.
Mhm.
And so I just have a question about, if somebody's like, okay, hearing this and they're like, I want to take one step forward into starting either a wellness policy or starting a wellness program, what do you think would be like the first lever um, that they should look to?
That's a good question. Chances are that the person in charge of the wellness policy at your school is either the school nutrition director or the director of operations. Those are usually the people that it falls to because they have to, fill out this form and be in compliance or whatever. Like it's part of just like every school's paperwork. And so finding out, where is that wellness policy? Does it exist? First of all, like from those folks, asking if you'd be able to review it, like if you haven't seen a wellness policy already. And then starting small, I would say, to think about ways to support whoever is overseeing it in getting their job done. Because like all of us want to make this like beautiful garden that's so wonderful, and we know it's going to be great, and we know it, like if it were just part of the school it'd be rainbows and honeysuckle. But the reality is like there's folks who don't want to make their job any harder. And so thinking about how you can navigate that and make their job easier and cooperate and compromise. Um, I think that's super important. Get to know the people who are having to fill out the paperwork so that you can help.
You've given so many just great nuggets of advice in this interview. And so, we want to kind of close out this interview by asking you, as this movement continues to grow, what advice would you give to those new to these roles or to these experiences?
Yeah. I mean, I'll reinforce like start small because a small project, you can have a small success. And if you have a small success, then you can build up on that success incrementally. Don't be in a rush to create the necessarily the like edible schoolyard of your place or the life lab of your place. Think about what's manageable, and it's going to look different for everyone everywhere. The biggest thing I see folks um like that gets people frustrated is when they bite off more than they can chew, and then they realize they don't have the support network to like sustain the work, and then it feels like a big failure. Um and they get overwhelmed and don't want to continue it. So I would give I would say folks who are starting out, like think of something small, something like I usually tell folks, especially in cities who don't have maybe a ton of gardening expertise or even a lot of capacity to maintain a garden, is start with herbs because those are generally, you can beat them up. Kids can beat them up. You can pick them, you can prune them. They're perennials in most parts of the country. You can do a number of lessons with them, culinary lessons, sensory lessons, historical lessons, and all kinds of stories around them. It's a great place to start. They don't like, you do need to water them, of course, through a summer, but most of them will kind of make it more than like a watermelon, right? Another thing I'd recommend is like short uh short span crops. I don't know, short whatever. But like things that grow within like 30 days, basically. So radishes and lettuces are great because they do really well in the fall in most of the country, um, before winter, and you can get a harvest out of them. Same thing goes for spring, usually before school ends. And so that's like a small success that you can provide for students. You can show to teachers like, hey, we were able to grow this and eat it. Or if you weren't able to grow it and eat it, like figuring out how to adapt so that, making it a lesson for the class. So yeah, take small bites. And also just like lean on your peers. There's a lot of people doing this around the country. You do not exist in like a vacuum. There's a ton of us who've been doing this for years, and there's a ton of new people starting. So like you have like a community.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lola, for all this really amazing advice, both on like personal, programmatic, spiritual, a lot of like nuggets of wisdom, and it's really inspirational to see just like the growth of the wellness program to the place that it is also now that you're not necessarily like at the core of it. And also big shout out to the community of DC Bilingual as well, because it takes a community to want to buy into that program and the school leaders as well. So thank you so much for today. And if you're interested in learning more about the wellness program of DC Bilingual, as well as Lola said, you're not alone in this work. Yeah, that's what the SGSO network is here to provide. Hopefully, is that connective tissue between programs. There will be more resources, especially relating to wellness policies, in the notes of this recording as well. So, thank you so much, Lola, for being here with us again. And thank you everybody that joined us today to watch this member highlight. So we hope to interview many more leaders in the school garden movement. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us.